In the first hours after the collision, Titanic took on hundreds of tons of water per minute. Did this added weight begin to tear the ship to pieces? Magellan helps investigators look for signs of damage in the hull caused by flooding.
Trying to do this without making a mess.
Along a region known as the well deck, the team spots a series of cracks.
So we're looking at a significant crack in way of the aft end of the well deck region on the starboard side.
They believe the cracks were formed as the bow sinks deeper into the water. As the stern rises, the stress increases throughout the vessel. Today, investigators find clear signs of that enormous tension on the wreck. This opening is known as an expansion joint. It was designed to relieve tension in the upper decks. The separation should only be inches wide. Now, it's several feet across. The night of the disaster, the joint is pulled open, causing the forward funnel to topple into the water. Next, the team surveys the break area itself, and the devastation is dramatic. How did flooding lead to such destruction?
The breaking up of the Titanic looks like it was a slow process. Not like bringing down a building where you plant all this dynamite and boom, and it all collapses down the middle. A ship breaking up is not a pretty sight. It's a very slow, agonizing death to a very large piece of machinery.
Following the buckle down.
It would be great to get images from this side and from the other side.
To model the final moments of the breakup, investigators will build a virtual Titanic, where they can simulate the flooding to see what happens.
This is a very clean, very straight fracture line too.
At the naval architectural firm Gibbs & Cox, investigators build a computer model of the Titanic to reconstruct the breakup. Bob Silsky is one of the structural engineers. He wants to see how flooding affects a specific part of the break area known as the ship's aft expansion joint.
We started with a basic analysis of the ship, knowing, of course, that the weakest area would be at the expansion joints in the deck, and that's where we zeroed in on our stress analysis.
Silsky's model also accounts for the strength of Titanic's steel, which we now know from the steel test. To begin the process, the bow is slowly flooded. With forward compartments full of water, the model changes from purple to blue, indicating that the stresses are increasing on the ship's hull. With 6 compartments filled, the model is transformed again. Red regions indicate the areas of highest stress. More than 65,000 pounds per square inch are exerted on the expansion joint. This is more than Titanic's steel can handle. And the great liner begins to break near the expansion joint and third funnel. Silsky's results have some startling implications. First, on the night of the disaster, many Titanic survivors testified that the stern rose nearly perpendicular during the sinking. But according to the new model, that would have been impossible. The stern never rose more than 12 degrees before the ship broke.
We know from our analysis that the ship didn't trim by about more than 12 degrees, and at that point the stresses became very high in the midships area. That's when it would have broken.
The model also suggests a clear sequence of the ship's destruction. Titanic broke from the upper decks first. Her bottom failed last. This scenario suggests a provocative new idea. After Titanic's midsection crumbles, could the bow and stern still be connected? Did a large section of hull bottom hold the ship together for a brief period underwater? To investigate this theory, researchers need to find this missing link that connected Titanic's bow and stern. Back at the site, the search is on for the phantom piece of hull.
Start to sank here.
Former French Navy commander P.H. Najolet believes he saw the large hull section more than a decade ago.
Funnels with
He thinks it might be in an area of debris some distance from the stern.
I think that it's my position.
Najolet, however, is not exactly certain of its coordinates. Previous attempts to find it have failed.
On this map, here is the bow section, here is the stern section. I don't remember if it was in 94 or 96. We tried to see again this piece, and we don't find it.
There are intakes on this piece here.
I think maybe I was dreaming, you know. Maybe it's a dream. 37.
If investigators can find the missing piece that held the bow and stern together, it will be one of the most intriguing discoveries of the expedition.
The bulkhead right in here.
The piece could help them reconstruct when and how the bow and stern actually separated.
Here, after is the hand of the...
To find the piece, Magellan sweeps the outermost portion of the stern wreckage, working inward to the stern itself.
That's your ship sticking out.
The team begins its search late at night, embarking on a lonely trek across the debris field.
Yeah, we're gonna move straight ahead. There's some stuff up here.
Sounds cool.
I understand you're moving out at 320?
Yeah.
Roger that, thank you.
Some small stuff right here. About 290.
Just before dawn, the team is down to a skeleton crew. The bridge is quiet. The Magellan pilots guide the ROV closer and closer to the stern wreckage. Suddenly, out of the darkness, the team spots something massive. Could it be the missing hull bottom that they were looking for?
Okay, bridge. We assume that we're sitting on the piece here.
You gotta wake the scientists up.
That's the line.
The scientists are roused out of bed to verify the discovery.
Do you see the CVK on your right of the screen?
Just about 4:30, I had a knock on the door with a very pleased announcement that we found it. We came right down on it. What it was a huge section of the bottom of the ship. I am sure that those who look for the beauty of chandeliers would yawn over it, but to an engineer, it was magnificent.
For the team, the Phantom piece is quite an impressive find.
That point, because that's where
They calculate it's a staggering 92.5 feet across.
This is a pretty big piece here.
It spanned the entire width of Titanic.
Looking 290. Try a few different things on this sonar here.
It also exceeds 26 feet in length. Its tattered condition provides testimony to its incredible story. The fact that the edges are bent and not cracked indicates that it was slowly pulled apart. Unlike the decks above, it did not give way rapidly. In the center of the piece is a massive beam called the keel. Given its tortuous appearance, it was probably the very last part of the ship to break. With this evidence, it now seems likely that when Titanic disappeared beneath the ocean waves, she was still in one piece. But somewhere in the first 500 feet, the hull bottom finally gave way. Here, the bow and stern began their separate and very different journeys. Ironically, Titanic's keel, the last section to give way during the breakup, was the first piece laid down during the ship's construction.
When these ships were built, they were built from the bottom up. The first thing you laid was the double bottom. This is the backbone of the ship. It was the last line of defense in the end. It was the last thing holding that ship together.
A storm front moves in, threatening the operation. Paul Mathias and the crew of Nautil are retrieved from dangerous seas. The harsh conditions of the deep begin to take a toll on his photographic equipment. Salt water also corrodes connectors, seals, and wires.
Because it sets right on top. Well, we've been faced with challenges. That is the way this one is. It just has one. Taking this equipment to a couple hundred feet pales by comparison to taking to 13,000 feet. And there, the environment is vicious. It's very tough on connectors, connections, wiring of any kind, and it's salt water, so it's very corrosive. Okay, so why don't we try to connect?
The crew on Ocean Voyager is also running into some problems of its own.
It looks like the compass is turning a little bit.
You should be 180 relative.
Rough seas are making it difficult for the captain to hold the ship steady above the wreck site.
It's tracking, whereas it wasn't before. Good.
As she drifts, she drags Magellan, endangering the ROV.
Come on! Left turn, Kurt!
Left turn.
Down!
Left
down.
turn, left turn.
Magellan has to be retrieved.
Okay, hold back.
At the surface, the 2.5-ton vehicle is tossed around like a toy.
I'm trying to turn.
Now, you got slack. Go.
The crew wrangles Magellan's cable as it's pulled from the ocean.
Roger that.
You gotta move that arm, Kurt.
I am. I'm trying to lift it up. All right, easy on tucking him up, Troy.
Roger.
Kill your depressor light.
Forceful winds kick at the crane, making it difficult to dock the robot.
Watch your head. Come back to the right. All stop.
Crews quickly scramble to anchor Magellan safely to the ship.
Stan, don't get in between there and the deck. Easy boom now.
Coming down slow.
Now all they can do is wait out the weather.
How am I looking on the handrails there?
Hurricane Bonnie is now moving quickly up the coast, threatening the expedition.
If it's moving at 15 miles an hour to the north.
The team takes the storm seriously, and they have to decide whether to risk staying or to run for cover.
That means it's moving almost 4 times faster than we are. The remnants of this could be debilitating on the ship itself.
Leaving means giving up the expedition.
I mean, I just want to object that I think if we break off site right now, we are effectively giving up the second leg. That's my opinion. I don't think that we're going to.
Much like that.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get back here and get any really effective plan done.
The decision is made to wait and see if the storm changes course. Accurately predicting weather at sea is a matter of life and death. Mistakes can be fatal, just as they were with Titanic. The night of the disaster, the ocean was as flat and placid as a lake. But the calm seas were misleading. Lurking in the darkness, dangerous icebergs drifted further south, occupying waters where they were seldom seen. A small miscalculation led to colossal catastrophe. Today, other forces are destroying Titanic. The great ship is slowly disappearing. Some scientists believe her steel is actually being eaten away by deep-sea bacteria. As the bacteria consume the ship, they create the rust-like structures dubbed rusticles that blanket nearly every surface of Titanic. Rusticles also decimate her interiors. Once glamorous, they're being transformed into grotesque and haunting chambers. Little by little, the rusticles are devouring Titanic. And nobody can say for sure how long until the great ship is gone forever. Dr. Roy Cullimore is trying to gauge how quickly the rusticles are destroying Titanic.
Idolizing the machines that can break the genetic code.
To do this, Cullimore needs to understand the rusticles' diet.
Why have you different?
Well, because these...
He wants to know what types of steel the rusticles prefer to eat.
We've got a really tough steel. We've got a very strong steel. We have a mild steel. We have steels that have been twisted and bent and tempered and burnt and hammered. And what we want to do is see whether the way that we've treated the steel affects the way the rusticles first grab onto the steel.
With a break in the weather, Cullimore dives to the wreck to deploy his experiments on Titanic's stern.
I believe we're looking at the collapsed bridge wing.
When he surfaces, Cullimore also uses Magellan to place experiments on Titanic's bow.
Okay, let's see what I can do here.
Through his work, Cullimore has already calculated that nearly 20% of the bow section has been devoured by the rusticles. Today, he's refining those estimates, and the rate of decay is alarming.
When you look at the Titanic today, I would say that the rusticles are removing 0.1 of a ton of iron from the steel every day. And so it's only going to be the matter of possibly 90 years before the Titanic biologically implodes, collapses into itself, and eventually simply becomes an iron ore deposit on the floor of the ocean. And there's an equal number in the
For biologist Roy Cullimore, expeditions like this are critical.
When there's no movement, like in Mortiel, when
The rusticles are destroying evidence of Titanic's disaster, just as we're beginning to understand her story. For Titanic, time is running out. Through the work of Paul Mathias, the world is getting its most complete view yet of the Titanic wreck site. A mosaic of Titanic that will live on for generations to come. For the first time, we can see a complete overview of Titanic's bow and stern. Titanic's bow can be studied as if the blackness of the North Atlantic had been removed. The destruction of Titanic's stern is catastrophic. It's almost unrecognizable.
The mosaics provide the overview and the relativity within the wreckage. The stern itself hidden by a flapped over piece of deck. If you look at them as an overall picture, they can be very beautiful.
Now this is actually part of the guts of the crane.
If you went down there in a submersible and you looked out the window, you would never see that.
The extent of the damage, I think, is visible.
It's totally artificial, but if you took the water away, that's what you would see.
You see here that you don't see elsewhere on the ship is side shell.
For the investigation, the photomosaics are a breakthrough,
Life rails anywhere on the stern.
That's right.
a great asset as the team combs through the wreckage to reconstruct the disaster. So far, the investigators have made some remarkable discoveries. They now believe that when Titanic grazed the iceberg, some of her rivets gave way, creating a thin opening in the ship's side. As she sinks, the bow section starts to crack. Titanic's stern rises. The structure suffers tremendous strain. Despite the apparent strength of her steel, Titanic's midsection crumbles. Titanic, however, does not break apart until the vessel is completely submerged. For a short period, she's held together by her keel and hull bottom. Still, investigators want to know the rest of the bow story. How fast did the bow fall as it plunged 2.5 miles into the abyss?
There is, of course, a lot of argument within professional circles about how fast a ship or parts of a ship are going to go down. Some would say that it would go down slowly, others say it will go down fast, it'll drop like a rock. These are things that we don't know yet.
Starting at the top, we have the famous rails, of course, around...
To Williams and the team, the photomosaic provides some very clear indications of the bow's speed.
The hatch here.
The structure is remarkably intact, which suggests its trip to the bottom may have been very slow.
This can give us some guidance as to the speed of descent.
If we look at the mosaic, what we see is a fairly clean structure. It's lost its funnels, the mast has been driven down.
And also the mast.
But there are some small pieces on the deck, which, if it had been traveling very fast, we would have expected to have been blown away by the force of the water.
Slow down as quickly as the structure as it hit the seabed.
If the bow sank quickly, the team believes that her railings would have been torn away. But most of the railings remain intact. The bow cranes are also still in place. Another sign of a slow descent.
And the whole thing, when you look at the detail, is of smoothness, slowness.
The photomosaic provides some clues about her speed.
Now this looks like a torn pipe.
Now investigators would like to know how the bow actually plunged to the bottom.
We need to understand how it actually traveled to the seabed. Did it rotate? Did it tumble? Did it just glide, or did it even stall and go into a falling leaf type pattern?
Back at the wreck site, investigators are building a case for the bow's fate.
Yeah. This looks like it's overhanging a bit.
On the port side, they examine a series of unexplained 90-degree bends in the hull plating. It appears that when the bow suddenly hit the sea floor, the impact created the bends.
Let's move off to the right along the mud line if you could. Okay.
On the opposite side of the ship, there's a large hole near the mud line. It too appears to have been formed by a sudden stop.
Global damage of the ship coming in on an angle and striking the seafloor.
Bow first, on the starboard side would tend to buckle it back.
That's still continuing. You can still see the upper reaches.
Yeah.
Okay.
Given this evidence, investigators develop a theory.
Yeah, looks like it. Useful intelligence. We learned something. One hypothesis that we want to test is that the bow came down following a corkscrew pattern, a helix. Came into the bottom in a stable glide path. Landed down into the mud. The bow stopped suddenly. The rest of it wants to come around behind it, and it'll try to fold it up like an accordion on one side and split it on the other.
To test this new idea, the scientists conduct an unusual experiment. One that charts new waters in marine forensics. At the Carderock facility, a team of scientists will sink a model of Titanic's bow. Surprisingly, those who build ships know little about them once they leave the surface.
Out of the picture, guys. It's all yours.
The way the vessel falls through the water column is a complete unknown. The navies of the world have carried out experiments, but on military-type ships, very specialist. What we haven't got is for general commercial shipping a knowledge of what happens in the water column. Titanic will fill a piece in that picture and give us one brick in the wall of that understanding.
The model is ferried out to its drop point beneath a tow cage. The cage is suspended from a massive indoor bridge. Its steel girders span more than 12 million gallons of water. This is one of the largest test tanks in the world.
Our crane's back center line.
As part of the development team, test manager Tom Waters makes some final adjustments. The bow model is just under 5 feet in length. The bow's mass, weight distribution and major features are represented.
The real interest here is what happened when the bow separated from the stern on Titanic. So the model testing of the bow should show us, hopefully, any particular attitudes that the bow may adopt. There are many, many issues that need to be looked at.
At the edge of the tank, scuba divers get into position. The bow's descent will be tracked through sonar. The model will send out an acoustic signal, which will be picked up by underwater microphones. The microphones will relay the acoustic signal to a computer for analysis.
Diver stand by.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The bow did not corkscrew as they expected.
That was interesting.
A revelation to the team.
Did it roll, Chip? Did it look like it was wanting to turn at all? Huh.
That was interesting, guys. She took a nose down, tended to glide a little bit, then she seemed to stall and settle in stern and kind of settle up even keel stern. About the same thing, it kind of went down and then kind of...
No, I saw out,
right,
back, out,
What
back.
surprised us all, I think, is the stability in the situation. We had expected that possibly it would swing one way and then the other, or we might see some tumbling and a sort of chaotic issue. But in fact, what we saw was something very, very stable.
Over the next 6 hours, the model is repeatedly dropped. as investigators zero in on a statistical average. These lines illustrate the bow's flight path is stable.
Divers in position. 3, 2, 1.
In each test, the bow does not corkscrew.
There it goes again. Same thing. Consistent.
A metal flange is added, mimicking Titanic's actual wreckage, to see if it causes a corkscrew motion. But the bow's fall remains consistent.
It was not spiraling. It was not a straight glide path. It was a bunting process where the vessel swooped down and then stalled, and then swooped again and stalled, and continued to do this right down to the seabed.
So I don't think she took a tight corkscrew like we thought.
Not a real.
The tank test results also indicate that the bow was falling at approximately 22 knots.
Right.
Much faster than Williams expected. When the bow hit the seafloor, it looks as if it struck nose first,
Knifing into the mud, and quite deeply into the mud at this point.
ploughing up mud,
With the rotation,
signified by the color red on this seafloor map.
squeezes this seabed, slumps back.
The map also shows a mound of mud on the ship's port side, which indicates a slight rotation upon impact.
Into the seabed and pumped up this side.
With this evidence, the final moments of Titanic's bow becomes painfully clear.
Yes.
After receiving a fatal blow from the iceberg, the bow begins a long, slow journey to destruction. The watertight compartment's overwhelmed, thousands of tons of seawater pulling her beneath the surface. Deep below, she begins a seesawing pattern as she slowly falls. Six minutes later, she smashes into the sea floor, ploughing up the mud. The sudden stop causes her port side to bend. Water explodes from the ship, creating the hole in her starboard side. For nearly 100 years, the bow has kept this part of her story hidden in the darkness of the deep. Now, the light of scientific discovery has revealed new understanding of Titanic's disaster. Ominous clouds move in on the Titanic site. The weather threatens again. Zodiac transfers are more difficult, even dangerous. For some members of the team, this is their first expedition at sea. The sight of big water can be troubling. Two hurricanes now have the potential to bear down on the expedition.
Once we finish the trim test,
the team has a 48-hour window of opportunity to continue its investigation.
Okay, so that means we're operating for the next 8?
Then, trained seamen and novices alike will brace for the worst.
With our system, you understand this. It's going to be a very quick training period.
The prospect of rough seas is unnerving.
You want to get in the water tonight, from what we understand.
Okay, it looks like it's going slow.
Get it, keep getting it.
Now the expedition takes on a new sense of urgency.
It's coming around.
Come on, you.
Magellan heads to Titanic's stern one last time.
Keep your head, spin right, 20. Spin right, 20.
Investigators would like to figure out why Titanic's stern is such an exploded mess.
All right, Kurt, give me a couple, little bit to the left.
Okay.
Titanic's obliterated stern has puzzled scientists for years. Compared to the bow, the stern is radically damaged, nearly unrecognizable as a ship. Investigators would like to know how this destruction could have occurred.
What it does show is a stark contrast with the bow itself that we saw earlier. When you look at the two mosaics, the bow and the stern, you see the bow, reasonably good condition. If you look at the bow, it's quite pristine. Okay, it's fairly clean, it's been wiped clean in a few areas, but the stern is a wreck. It looks as if a bomb's hit it. And in fact, that's probably the equivalent of what happened.
After Titanic disappeared, some survivors claimed to hear thunderous, explosive sounds deep below the surface.
Not until she was entirely submerged. The explosion sounded like reports of a big gun in the distance. Third Officer Herbert Pittman.
From the lifeboats, first-class passenger Edith Russell also heard similar sounds emanating from the deep.
There was a heavy, heavy explosion beneath the water, then a second and a third. These explosions actually thrust our lifeboat farther away, as by an invisible hand. First-class passenger Edith Russell.
Investigators want to find out if these explosions are somehow related to the destruction of the stern. Magellan's cameras scour the stern wreckage, looking for answers.
Okay, I think it's going to start getting cloudy here soon. You want me to come up on that hanging piece real slow?
Roger that.
See, I got the current coming right, from my rear. Am I clear on the left?
One area of intrigue: Titanic's aft poop deck. The deck is peeled back, almost like the lid of a sardine can, revealing understructure and ribbing. Scientists think the source of the explosions might be found beneath these decks. Directly below the poop deck are a series of holes that were not flooded. Instead, they were filled with trapped air. As the stern sinks, water pressure compresses the trapped air until it violently implodes inward. Then it violently explodes outward, blasting back the poop deck. Some historians believe one area that imploded, then exploded, was Titanic's refrigeration holds.
Well, that's where the refrigerated cargo was in the stern.
The holds held enough food for more than 2,000 passengers on a 7-day voyage.
When you have when you have 2,300 people and they're going to be on board for better than a week, the quantities are really enormous.
Fresh meat, 75,000 pounds. Poultry and game, 25,000 pounds.
The space required to hold Titanic's food was massive.
2,500 pounds of sausage, that's 10,000 pounds.
The equivalent of nearly 4,000 average-sized refrigerators.
1,000 sets, fresh eggs.
A large and potentially explosive space.
1,200 quarts of fresh cream.
Historian Klaus Wetterholm suspects the refrigeration holds blew up.
This is where we find so much damage.
He points to some provocative evidence. The holds, like much of the ship, were insulated with cork.
Whoever has been on a ship knows that that's what you do on a ship, you eat.
According to Wetterholm, when the stern was exploding, it released an incredible amount of cork.
Perhaps. On the night when the ship went down, many survivors said that there was a lot of cork on the sea. Some of them refer to this as a carpet covering the whole sea, red-brown carpet, cork, billions of fragments of cork. And this comes from the ship.
Based on the wreckage of the stern, investigators develop a destruction sequence to try to determine what happened. They think that as the stern reached a depth of about 200 feet, the water pressure compressed the structure. All trapped air was then blasted out, with enough force to level nearly a square mile of houses.
If any structure sinks that's still intact all around, as it goes down, it becomes compressed from the water pressure. And then when it collapses, the air is compressed, and then it expands outwards again, like an explosion.
In their computer model, the first compartment decimated is the turbine engine room, followed by the electrical machinery room, then the stern tunnels and the peak tank. Then, the spaces above would collapse in an unidentifiable sequence.
They're highly compartmentalized, rigid bulkheads covered in cork, airtight spaces.
Back at Carderock, the team tracks the route the air took as it wreaked havoc on the stern.
50 or 80 feet. There were various routes for this expelling air to come up through. It's following a maze. The air follows a maze through the structure, and at each turn, at each bend, it disrupts it, it destroys it.
One of the most direct and destructive paths the air took was up the third-class staircase, directly below the poop deck.
Most probably the stairwell access is the route that the air took, and it came up that stairwell into the lounge area where it congregated underneath the deckhead, and then through buoyancy, probably more than anything, just lifted that deckhead over and laid it down.
Escaping air, it appears, had the power to ravage the stern, contorting and twisting her into an exploded mess.
From then on, it was a wreck. It was disrupted and broken. There's no evidence that it rolled over because we'd have lost a lot of the loose structure on top. It was vertical all the way to the seabed.
The state of the stern wreckage once defied description. Dangerous and foreboding, it was largely unexplored. Its story completely unknown. A groundbreaking exploration has changed all that. Now we can see and understand the stern through the eyes of science. Nearly 100 years ago, the great RMS Titanic embarked on her maiden voyage. A ship of dreams. She had a bright future beyond the horizon. A destination she would never reach.
I think that the enduring public fascination kind of spurs us on to find out exactly what happened. It's such this huge mystique.
It's taken nearly a century for scientists to piece together Titanic's demise. And they've realized the tragedy is far more complex than ever imagined.
And most people would say, oh, it sank because it collided with the iceberg. It didn't really sink because of that. That was the initiating event. Most vessels sink because there is a series of consequences which lead you to the final loss.
Now that we can see Titanic's final moments with greater clarity, we are more awed by the scope and scale of her destruction.
Well, one thing we did learn from the final hours of the Titanic, that it was certainly a lot more chaotic than we had ever thought before.
Locked in her tortured steel is the dramatic account of what happened. New expedition discoveries have filled in missing parts to Titanic's story. Innovative techniques have now revealed the ship in a startling new light. Groundbreaking experiments have finally solved long-standing mysteries.
What this whole expedition has been able to do is put pieces together to give you, or give the world really, a full story of what happened that night. How did the ship break out? Where did it end up? And why did it end up there?
As the expedition draws to a close, a hurricane pushes the team off-site. Success and celebration are tempered by the power of the sea. Deep below the turbulent waves, Titanic rests. Silent for so many years, her wreckage has had much to say. We have finally pieced together many of her long-held secrets, traveled deep in search of answers. And now, we know Titanic as never before.